Hey guys, welcome back. I appreciate you stopping on in. So today I was brainstorming a list of possible individuals that could be a vice presidential choice if Bernie Sanders goes on and wins the 2020 Democratic nomination. I've compiled a list of 12 different individuals. I don't think any of them are perfect choices, and that would be checking off every box that you would look for in a VP, things such as being really well known nationally so you can increase the grassroots and donor base behind your ticket, but beyond that, helping win a battleground state, somebody who's of a different identity and background, but also somebody who aligns with you ideologically, because if you have to step down as the president, you want your VP to somebody who continues on your mantle, your policy, the issues that you're going to be fighting for. Again, you want to have that in a VP pick. And there's just a lot of these different things that go into picking a vice president. And again, I don't think any of these 12 individuals that I have here are the absolute 100% perfect choice, but I think it's a list that check off more boxes than they don't. Some of these picks are probably better than others, and I'd love to hear who you guys think out of these 12 individuals would be the best choice for Sanders to pick strategically as his VP. And I'm almost certainly leaving some people off this list who you would think would be a great VP choice, so I'd also love to hear about them down in the video description as well. So in no particular order, these aren't ranked. These are just 12 different people that I thought about for today's video. So starting here, we have Pramila Jayapal. She is the author of Medicare for All in the House of Representatives, just like Senator Sanders is over in the Senate with his Medicare for All bill. They're very aligned ideologically. Jayapal has a ton of experience. She's of a different identity background. Perhaps the only detraction is the fact that she doesn't help win a battleground state, but I still think she expands the electorate for Bernie Sanders, bringing perhaps a different coalition behind him than what he has currently. She is the congresswoman from Washington, so that's the situation where you know the Democrats are going to win Washington, so she doesn't help in that battleground scenario. But outside of that, she checks off a ton of boxes. I think she would be a great possible pick for Bernie Sanders and somebody that his progressive base would really get behind. Now, this next option would be a very strategic pick, and that is the Wisconsin Senator Tammy Baldwin. Now, I still think that the progressive voters would be okay with a Baldwin. She probably isn't perhaps quite as progressive as Bernie Sanders and a lot of these other candidates that I have on this list, but she is a bit more populist and progressive, especially when we're taking a look at the Democrats in the Senate. She's actually really far on the left, and she supports Medicare for All. She's a co-signer of that bill. And she does something that I think is the most important thing for either the Republicans or the Democrats, and that would be almost guarantee and lock up the state of Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin is the most pivotal and key state to win, and if it is a Sanders-Baldwin ticket, that almost essentially, in my opinion, locks up the state for the Democratic Party. We saw in the 2018 midterms, Baldwin absolutely crushed it statewide, winning by double digits. She actually got a lot of people who ended up voting for Republican Governor Scott Walker. She got a lot of that vote because the governor's race was a lot closer than what we saw in the Senate race. She's very popular in the state of Wisconsin, and again, I think that it would be a really strong strategic choice for Sanders to pick somebody like a Baldwin. She's also a bit younger, female, perhaps brings in more excitement from the Hillary Clinton wing of the Democratic Party, not even necessarily because of ideological reasons, because I think that Baldwin more aligns with Sanders than Clinton on the issues, but it would just be more the fact that I think that she could build bridges between the Sanders and the Clinton wing of the party for whatever that is worth. All right, another option that I have here is Nina Turner. Younger, of a different identity and background, aligns with Sanders in terms of their policy and ideology, of course. Now, the detractors will say she's not experienced enough. She was the state senator from Ohio, and she's also the head of Our Revolution. She's going around, arguably the most important surrogate that Bernie Sanders has, and going around and campaigning with him. And I think if Nina Turner wanted to be VP, I think that the Sanders camp would almost certainly choose her to do so. But perhaps also the detractors might say, well, she's not super well known nationally outside of what is already the Bernie Sanders coalition, so maybe she doesn't expand it as much as maybe some of the other options could, but certainly a great choice in terms of the different identities of these two individuals, of Turner and Sanders, but the fact that they still line up ideologically lockstep and would be very similar. If either one of them was president, they would be fighting for the same set of policies and issues. Another individual here, a younger female of a different identity background, Tulsi Gabbard. And there's actually ties between Gabbard and Sanders. The fact that back in the 2016 primary, Gabbard didn't like how the DNC was treating Bernie Sanders. She stepped down at the DNC and started campaigning with Bernie Sanders around the country. Now, progressives might not like this pick as much as some other possible options as VP, because it seems like what we're hearing out of Gabbard from 2016 to where she is now, she seems to have moderated a bit. For instance, she doesn't seem quite as all in for something like a Medicare for all. That's what we've heard from her on the debate stage. But also the establishment wing of the Democratic Party, for whatever reason, doesn't like Gabbard. And I think it's primarily because of what she was basically picked as the golden girl to be the future of the establishment of the Democratic Party. And she threw all that away, stepping down from the DNC to back Sanders in 2016, which made a lot of progressives happy. It made a lot of establishment figures and individuals in the Democratic Party not very happy. And then you also have the situation right now where Hillary Clinton unfairly is throwing conspiracy theories at Gabbard. The fact that she says she's a Russian asset, just unsubstantiated claims. And then Gabbard fighting back, which she has every reason to do on Twitter, against Hillary Clinton. But I don't think that's the reason why progressive individuals would be against Gabbard being VP. Again, I think it's because she has moderated a bit more on some of these issues over recent years, but still somebody to keep in mind and somebody that has had ties to the Sanders campaign in the past. These next two picks I have are two individuals that come from a different identity background from Sanders. They're younger. They're both from the state of Michigan. They're both extremely aligned with Sanders ideologically. They're both Justice Democrats or have run as Justice Democrats, and they're both from Michigan, so that's a battleground situation that could possibly help flip that state over to Bernie Sanders in 2020. But the knock on both of these individuals is also going to be the fact that maybe they don't have enough experience to be a VP choice. That being Abdul El-Sayed, who you currently see on the screen. AOC and Bernie Sanders actually campaigned for El-Sayed in Michigan back in his 2018 midterm when he was running to be the Democratic nominee for governor. Of course, Whitmer ended up winning that election and then winning the general election. El-Sayed came in second place. But in terms of ideology, just lockstep with Bernie Sanders on essentially everything. He is viewed as an up-and-comer in the progressive wing of the party, perhaps in the state of Michigan, and a guy to keep an eye out on in the future to see what he's doing in his political future. But then you have somebody who actually won her election, a bit more of a manageable election, clearly, for Rashida Tlaib to win than what El-Sayed was doing statewide in Michigan. But still, Rashida Tlaib had a competitive primary, was able to win that as a Justice Democrat. And then she is in one of the most left-leaning districts in the country, winning that in the state of Michigan. She actually just recently endorsed Bernie Sanders and somebody who they might think as a possible VP. But of these two picks between Abdul El-Sayed and Rashida Tlaib, I think out of all of these individuals that I talk about in this list, they're probably a little bit lower in the potential pecking order to be picked than some of these other ones. And I think primarily that'd probably be more of an experience issue than anything, not an ideological one in that instance. Another option here, possibly Andrew Yang. Now, in terms of their ideology, a little different. Basically, they try to get to the same goals, but they have different ways of doing it, and I think that would probably be the reason why they don't pick Andrew Yang, the Bernie Sanders campaign, to be his VP. The positives for Yang is what he's been able to do, marketing himself, getting out there, speaking to anyone and everyone. I don't think I've ever met anyone who has heard Andrew Yang speak and thought to themselves, man, I really don't like that guy. And I'm talking about conservatives, independents, progressives, liberals, the whole spectrum of the political backgrounds. It seems like Andrew Yang is able to build bridges, has a general positive impact on people when he's speaking. And just what he's been able to do, a complete outsider, a complete unknown, and he's been able to get himself in around the 5th to 6th position in this 2020 Democratic primary field, surpassing people who are much more known than him coming into the process. Been pretty impressive what he's been able to accomplish, maybe somebody to keep in mind as a VP pick. The next option we have here, Keith Ellison from an important state in Minnesota. He actually won statewide in Minnesota in 2018, I believe, as the Attorney General. Used to be in the House of Representatives. Ilhan Omar took over his seat. He was possibly going to be the head of the DNC. There was a big push behind him, but at the last second, the establishment wing of the party was thinking, we don't want a progressive guy to be the head of the DNC, so they brought in Tom Perez, and at the last second, he was able to just sneak by Keith Ellison in that vote for who was ending up being the head of the DNC. A lot of progressives were very upset about that. Ellison, early supporter, strong supporter of Bernie Sanders in his 2016 efforts, and again, has shown he can win statewide in Minnesota, which is a key important state. So he is somebody to keep in mind as a possible option. Then we have Beto O'Rourke. This is on the more strategic end of who you'd pick as a VP. And an O'Rourke under Sanders and his ticket could possibly help the Democrats win not just the presidency by winning Texas statewide, but also perhaps helping Democrats in important House races in the state of Texas, or maybe even the Senate race in the state of Texas. Him being a VP pick, a young, relatively young, I'll say, viewed as probably more of an up-and-comer for the establishment than the progressive wing of the party, but that doesn't mean that there aren't progressive issues that O'Rourke aligns with the progressive wing of the party. He doesn't take corporate campaign contributions. He doesn't take that PAC money, and then also he's very progressive on certain issues. However, there are a lot of progressives that were upset with O'Rourke and what he did in his Senate campaign, where he said his number one issue is he was going to campaign on Medicare for all. He won the Democratic primary, probably partly because of that stance that he took, and then he moderated on the position in the general election against Ted Cruz. That turned off a lot of people. And he's just had a weird political history and background. When he was in Congress, he was a part of the New Democrats, which was a corporate group inside of the Democratic Party. But again, he's taken progressive stances. He's taken moderate stances. You don't really know exactly where he's standing on all of these issues. So that really turns off a lot of progressives, for instance. But again, he's very well known. He can bring in a lot of donations, small dollar donors in particular. He's a good campaigner. What he did in the Senate, he broke records in terms of campaign funding with those small dollar grassroots support. So that would be a positive that he could bring to the table as a VP. And again, his ties to the state of Texas in what is starting to become a bit of a battleground state from this point going forward, but would be pretty interesting and a possible pick to keep in mind. Another strategic pick is Gillum. Again, there's kind of a love-hate relationship with the progressive base and Gillum, because in 2016, he was a big supporter of Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. But then when he ran in 2018 in the Democratic primary, he was an underdog. He took a very progressive approach to the policies that he was pushing for. He got Bernie Sanders to campaign and support him. He went on to win the Democratic nomination, upsetting two individuals that were I actually think it was three individuals that were polling above him, again, because he took those strong progressive issues and campaigned on them in Florida. But then in the general election, he moderated his stances, which very similar to what we saw from Beto O'Rourke, and that really ticked off a lot of progressives that supported him in winning. He's younger. He's of a different identity background, and he would be a popular pick amongst the establishment of the Democratic Party, maybe not quite as much so for the progressive wing of the party, but he's also from Florida, which is a key battleground state, and that can perhaps help you in that instance. So a guy that maybe is on the radar, especially with Bernie Sanders campaigning for Gillum back in 2018, that shows you that they're aligned ideologically enough that he could be a pick for him as VP and maybe somebody they consider. This option here is pretty straightforward. Elizabeth Warren, a woman, slightly younger, not all that much of a difference, though, in age. And then also it won't help all that much in terms of a specific key battleground state because she's from the Northeast, just like Sanders is, but very well known, relatively similar with a lot of their policies and issues that they're pushing for. However, Bernie's more for the revolution and Warren is more for reforms. But in terms of all these candidates or possible candidates for VP here, she's probably more middle of the road, where some of these options that I have are maybe to the right of her, some of them are to the left. But what she really brings to the table is bringing more women potentially into the process. The fact that she's very well known, an effective campaigner, somebody who's going to be tough on Wall Street and getting things done, having plans to implement, a fighter, somebody who can bring in and has shown that she can bring in a lot of grassroots support and small dollar donations. And I think that she would be a great potential VP pick behind Bernie Sanders, somebody to look out for. And I believe this is the last person that I have here on the list. This is maybe my favorite choice out of all these 12 individuals. I like a lot of the people that I talked about in this video as possible VP options for Sanders. I've always been a fan of Roe Khanna. He was the first guy to become a Justice Democrat, and also a guy who has shown he goes on Fox News, and he's actually really effective in speaking out progressive ideology in a way that you can bring in conservatives potentially into the process. He's a younger guy, certainly a up-and-comer in the progressive wing of the party. He's a surrogate for Bernie Sanders. He's gone around the country and campaigned with Bernie Sanders. Now, Roe Khanna has a lot of positives where I think he doesn't check off some boxes. Obviously, the fact that he's a congressman from California, and we know the Democrats are going to win California, so he doesn't necessarily expand the base in that scenario. And then also, I don't think he's necessarily the best at giving stump speeches and really getting people riled up and excited. But ideologically and principally, he's very aligned with Bernie Sanders. He has experience in the House of Representatives, and a guy that is a potential possibility that Sanders might pick as his VP. Now, we've heard Sanders say a little bit on the topic of VP that he is probably leaning more towards a woman than a man to kind of mix the background of the individuals, obviously, that are on the ticket. So that is also something to keep in mind as well. So these are the 12 candidates that I brainstormed today as possible VP picks for Bernie Sanders, and I'd love to know who you guys think is the best option among them, or if I missed a candidate who you think would be an excellent choice. Now, for you progressives out there, you might think, well, why didn't you say AOC? And that is because she's, I believe, 28 or 29 years old, so too young to be VP. And then also somebody like an Ilhan Omar, who could be a great choice and old enough to be VP, but you have to be a naturalized, born in the United States citizen, where she was born and then came over to the United States. So that is why I didn't have her in this particular list. But those are the 12 individuals, and I'd love to hear you guys' opinions down in the comments section. I appreciate you stopping on in. Consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, and I'll see you guys back here for my next video.